I've been on a few trips over the years, some of you are aware of that, and one of the things I get asked is, how do I get involved? I've got no decent shack at home, I've got local QRM. And there are other reasons for doing it, even if you have got a shack at home, to gain experience in operating and station design, see how others do it. To experience operating and propagation from new locations, you know, around the UK or elsewhere in the world. See new places, because if you go somewhere as a guest operator in another country, you'll often be looked after by the locals and you'll see the country from the inside, not just from Thomas Cook Hotel. Oh no, you'll spend a lot of time there. Get away from the UK weather, that's been quite a significant factor for me. And it's sociable. Team operating, whether it's on an expedition or contesting, is good fun. You get to play at some nice stations. This is me in Oman the other year, A44A for the COWw Worldwide CW. Some of you will recognise this gentleman. That's Dick Norton, N6AA. He has operated from all 40 COWw zones in the COWw contests. In fact, he was in Oman the year before me. That picture was taken in Guinea, 3 X-ray, when he joined us on a voodoo trip. Then last year he was in Thailand, where I'd been the year before. He hasn't got to 40 countries by taking his station around, well, 40 zones by taking his station around with him. He's done it as a guest op. So you're probably wanting to gain experience, but where do you start? Well, they want you. How much is it going to cost? And what will they expect me to do? I've tried to put a few pictures in here just to liven things up. That was my first trip with the Voodoos to Africa. That was in Ghana, 9G5AA, and a nice low-rise hotel, and they let you put antennas on the roof. That's one of the nice things about traveling, is that some hotels there are actually quite happy for you to put antennas up. They get very excited about what you're doing. I don't think this place or the hotel down the road, for example, would be quite so keen. But if you pick the right spots. In my case, just a little bit of history, I'll take you through some of my experiences, but I actually started doing trips in my university days. We went to Scotland to put counties on the air, on top band, and then HB9, HB0 for U1ITU. And then Martin organised trips to Jersey and various IOTAs that I did with him, to the Farne Islands and Flannans and St Kilda and so on. And that in turn got me to meet some people in those places, and particularly in the Channel Islands. And I went back then for a number of COWw Worldwide contests. But you know, having had the experience in Guernsey, for example, of putting the antennas up on the Friday before the contest, the phone contest in October, going out to a restaurant, coming back to the site and finding that all the antennas were on the ground because it was blowing such a wind. Having had the experience in November of sliding about on the roof of the TV station in Jersey trying to put antennas up because it was blowing such a wind and it was icy underfoot, and wishing I was somewhere warm. Unfortunately, I knew a few of the guys who'd been going to West Africa for a few years, the voodoo contesters, and it's always difficult to keep a team together. You know, some come and some go, so they were in need of an operator and invited me to join them. And boy, walking out into that November sunshine in West Africa, it was a whole different experience. But other things too. I mean, my first half-serious expedition was back in '94, and that came out of a friendship with Chris at S6EZ. When Martin and I were editing the DX news sheet, some of you will remember that, back in the early 80s, Chris had got in touch with me. He needed somebody to help him get rid of international reply coupons, of all things. He couldn't exchange them in South Africa, and it led to me becoming friendly with him, and he invited me to join him for an expedition to Walvis Bay in Namibia. And that was fun, and that in turn sort of raised my profile as an expeditioner. So when a group of people, Tony Canning, G0PB, Steve Telenius Lowe, G4JVG, better known these days as PJ4DX, and others, with the inspiration of somebody that you'll all remember, Neville Cheadle, G3NUG, said we're going to go to the Spratly Islands. And good heavens, what happened to that lot? Well, the Spratlys, Comoros, Rodrigues, St. Brandon, and then Christmas Island was our last one in 2010. So that was a bunch of things, but you know, that was an interesting ride, if you like. More and more people involved over the years, bringing on new operators. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. There really are opportunities. You know, many multi-op contest teams are short of operators and helpers. Those of you who saw the M6T presentation yesterday, Dave was talking about you know, what they're doing, massive station, but you need a lot of people to keep 6 bands on the air to 48 hours. Not just keeping it on the air, but keeping the station going and so on. You know, even if you're not a top operator, there's a lot else that you can do to help and be part of the team. And then gradually, you know, they'll let you loose on 160 meters in the middle of the day or something when you can't do too much harm. But gradually, you'll get the prime slots. And expeditions get organised, but they find they need more operators or particular skills. I mean, you can't always say yes. I had a classic one, a phone call one evening, this is some years ago now, where the microlight expeditioners were going, I think it was to South Orkney, and Declan EI6FR called me and he said there's a vacant bunk on the Braveheart. If you can be down, get yourself down to Punta Arenas by, I think it was next Tuesday or something like that, and for $10,000 you can join us. And clearly they wanted to spread the cost of the trip a little bit more. I'm afraid I had to demur on that one. But I mean, you know, even your local club may want to run a modest expedition and want someone to take the lead, and you can step up to the bar and say, yeah, I have an idea what to do. And these are the sort of opportunities that come along. Is Andy in the room at the moment? He's probably not, because he's seen this one already. But earlier this year, he put this request on the CDXC reflector, and I'm not asking you to read all of it, but basically he's saying, I've built a decent station, I'm an SSB operator, there's a seat there for a COWw ARP, a nice warm place to stay overnight, and all the kit's there. Come and join me, come and do a COWw contest and show me how my station works on COWw. And sadly, he didn't get any takers, and that was a shame. But those opportunities do come along. And that was posted, as I say, on the CDXC reflector. And so a lot of people would have seen that. But it is really all about raising your profile. Starting small, and maybe a modest single or 2 operator effort. Go with a mate to an island. It doesn't have to be very exotic. The Isle of Wight has a separate IOTA reference. Or a SOTA. As I said earlier, maybe a club expedition, just something, a holiday trip, but do a bit of operating in the summer, go on for the IOTA contest or something. And I would recommend getting contest experience, even if you're a DXer and you want to go on a DXpedition, because as we've pointed out to people in the past, a DXer can spend 2 or 3 days chasing that one slot that he needs for the DXCC challenge. But on a DXpedition, you're expected to sit there and put 100 QSOs in the log every hour or better. And you don't get that necessarily from being a DXer, but you do get that from taking part in contests. And it's easy these days, you know, with CEPT licensing, a group of you can go off around Europe. CPT licensing isn't going to change after that thing we don't talk about at the end of October, although it may be a bit more difficult to take your kit with you. But it all helps to get you noticed, as I said, to raise your profile. Let me just talk about how we chose operators for FSDXA. And this doesn't apply to all situations, but it gives you an idea of the sort of thing a group might be looking for. Somebody who's got at least 2 modes, because, and Dave Dean was talking about this yesterday in respect of 5V. If all you do is SSB, there are times when propagation is pretty poor. You need a weak signal mode. You need COWw, or that other mode that we don't talk about. Anyway. So that's important, you know, so that people can do an operating slot. They'll come on, the band's not in good shape, but they can eke out some QSOs. And we asked each operator also to bring at least one further skill, and we had, in Christmas Island, we had Fred G3SVK doing a great job with video photography. Always like to have still photography. If you're going somewhere remote, you almost certainly could do with a medical person with you. In fact, it doesn't have to be that remote. I wouldn't want to end up in some of the hospitals in mainland Africa either. So, if you've got some sort of doctor with you, that's not bad. And then, of course, there's all the RF stuff, putting that together. And as we know, the biggest challenge of all on most expeditions these days is sorting out the IT. Each operator has to fit in, and this is perhaps one of the more important things, and one of the things we did settle on after one or two unfortunate experiences in FSDXA was that if somebody said, I want to come with you, we'd say within the organising team, well, who knows him? Who can vouch for him? And we'd need at least one person really to vouch for that potential operator, because, as I say, we'd had one or two instances where people had come for the wrong reasons, and they'd offered to contribute money or help, but when they got there, turned out they were not a team player. And there was one classic, and not with our operators, but there was one gentleman from Scandinavia who used to do some absolutely wonderful single-person expeditions around the world. But then when he went with a group and they thought, yeah, he's pretty good, he's a good operator and so on, apparently when they arrived and had everything set up, he went along to the other end of the beach and did his own single operator expedition. Not good, not good at all. As I said, contest experience is valuable, and that's something we would look for. But certainly with FSDXA, because we were taking a large group, we could afford to take along some up-and-coming operators, some inexperienced operators, and hopefully at least one young operator. And one was Mark M0DXR. He wasn't even 18 when we went to the Comoros, but John G3WGV helped him to raise some sponsorship. And his dad, who was helping us with some of the aspects of the shipping, said, well, his mum and dad said he could go. And of course, Mark's gone from strength to strength over the years, as we all know. So we did something good at least. IOTA operations can be easy, as I said earlier, fairly low key. This is Martin ZAY and myself on St Kilda. Many years ago, not that, just off the British Isles, although we had one heck of a sea crossing to get there, as it turned out. But you get other opportunities too, and they come out at, in the oddest ways. But this one, when Nigel and I went to OJ0, came out of a Contest Club Finland meeting, and they have this cruise each year in February, usually, or thereabouts, between Stockholm and Helsinki, and talking to some of the lads there, and saying, well, what about OJ0? Oh, yes, good one for the IOTA contest. And sure enough, Nigel and I went up there via Sweden, met up with a couple of the Swedish guys, went over there and had a fantastic time. But it came out of, not surprisingly, as many of these things do, having a beer on a boat on the Contest Club Finland cruise. Some things are just a lot easier. Last year I was asked to be a presenter at the EIDX convention, which was conveniently on the Aran Islands, and I'd never operated from EI, and they'd set up a station because that's what you do when you organise a convention on an island, and I did some operating from there. So how do you get invited? Well, I've given you a lot of the clues. You build experience both in contest operating and those additional skills. You get noticed. You come to events like this and talk to people and say, yeah, actually, You know, I've been doing some stuff from home. I wouldn't mind going along. Attend socials and conventions. Personal contacts. Watch the internet reflectors, the contest reflector, and others, the CDXC reflector. And then be prepared to approach the organisers directly. And then what happens? Yes, we'd love to have you. So don't be shy, become an active participant. I mean, that's difficult if you're joining a group of French operators in Tunisia and you're in the UK. You may not see them until you're on a plane going out there. But as often as not, they'll be just down the road and they'll say, yeah, we need to build up the station beforehand, check it all out, because once we get on the island or in the African country or whatever, there isn't a convenient Martin Lynch down the road. So come along and help us build it all up and check it all out. Get to know the other team members. Offer yourself for specific roles. And learn what is expected of you so that there's no misunderstandings when you get there. And that applies to host expectations. If you're going to stay with somebody in another country and operate from their house or operate their station, what are they expecting? Do they want you to bring something? Do they expect a gift? Or whatever. It's best to sort that all out beforehand. And familiarise yourself with the gear and the software that will be used, because there's nothing worse than arriving somewhere and you're about to go on the air with a rare call sign and the most massive pile-up, and you think, oh my God, how do I operate one of these? I've never sat in front of an ICOM radio before because I use Yaesu or whatever. I've never used this particular software. I've always logged on paper. No, none of you do that. So I'll run through a few examples. I mean, this was an interesting one anyway, just a couple of years ago, because I had seen that the CNET convention, the Southeast Asian Network, which is a bit of a social thing, were having their event in Kampuchea, and they were going to have it at Siem Reap, and I'd always wanted to go to Angkor Wat, so I signed up to that. And I thought, well, yeah, but that's fine. It's a long way to go, and they made the big mistake. So you can tell they're not really a serious amateur radio group because they didn't have a station set up. I never did get to operate from Cambodia. But I thought, I'm traveling via Thailand. You can get to Bangkok so easily. It's a bit more difficult getting to Siem Reap. So I got in touch with Champ, who I knew from WRTC events, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. And some of you will have seen Dave Sumner's presentation about that yesterday. And he put me in touch with LA7JO, who has a station and was hosting a group for COWw Worldwide CW, which was just a week after the CNET convention. And as it happened, I'd met Stig anyway at Visalia. So, again, so he knew who I was and was comfortable in saying, yeah, Don can join us. Well, then it turned out that Fred K3ZO was going to be there, and it was his 80th birthday. Bob 5B4AGN, G3ZEM, as some of us know him, Andy G3AB, and some other well-known call signs like DL3 DXX were going to be there as well. So it turned out to be one fabulous get-together. Although it was a challenge operating from Zone 26. You're a long way from anywhere apart from Japan, which is 1 point. All those 3-point QSOs, a long way away. But in terms of camaraderie, some celebrations for Fred's 80th birthday and so on, fabulous. Yeah, a lot of radio amateurs who just work through the local repeater don't know what they're missing. And other things. I'd known Trey N5KO for many, many years, just from business trips to Northern California. Because you don't go on a trip to Northern California without making sure you go to a Northern California DX Club meeting. And I went to my first Northern California DX Club meeting back in, I think it was around 1990 or something. And I'd been invited along by N6 TV Bob to go to the meeting, and then I got a call saying, actually, our speakers dropped out. You don't happen to have anything with you that you could do? And I'd happened to have taken some slides of some of our Channel Islands operations, which may not be exotic to us, but they sure are to people in California. And I ended up being the guest presenter and got to know a bunch of the guys out there, and that's stood me in good stead over the years. Those guys, W6NL, Dave Leeson, and Trey and others, had created a handy little station on the Galapagos Islands. And it had always been North American operators, but Trey had been asking me for several years if I would go and join them, and I did, and had a great time. Incidentally, I would say, though, that I'd been with the Voodoo guys several times to West Africa, and we'd always come second to HC8N, so I thought, this is great. And I went to HC8N, and we came second to a bunch of Finns who went to EA8. So the moral is, never go contesting with me, because you'll always end up second. But you know, a lot of learning experiences from that one. You know, we were with K1EA when he was one of the operators, and he was the developer of CT, which we were all using for contest logging at the time. And half an hour before the contest, he was writing the code to connect to a radio that was at the station there that he hadn't come across before. So, yes. I've mentioned FSDXA, but we kind of ran out of steam with that one. And Chris is going to be talking about VK9XG in the next session in this room after lunch. But it had been every 3 years, and then it had been 4 or 5 years, and nothing had happened. And so at this convention, a few years ago, a few of us over a beer, where else, decided it was time to do something, a fly-in, fly-out, lightweight expedition. And many of you will have worked us from the Australs. I didn't go to Niue, but some of the guys are here. Chatham, Christmas Island. And guess what? We may just be getting together later today to talk about where the next one might be. And the Voodoo thing, we kind of ran out of steam in West Africa. And I got invited, well, I told you why I got invited, but it didn't stop because these people knew each other. And we got an invitation by Hamad, who 9K2HN, who I knew also from WRTC, to go out to Kuwait. And in fact, we took and still hold the multi-CW record in CQ Worldwide CW. And a good bunch, that's me with W6RGG, all of a few, well, that's 70 kilometers from the Iraq border, but the station was 8 kilometers from the Iraq border, a little bit. But there's the station, and again, nice station out in the middle of nowhere. Hospitality was fabulous. They laid on quite some meals for us, particularly as it was Thanksgiving. The CQ Worldwide CW usually coincides with Thanksgiving in the States, and because half the Voodoo guys typically are American, it's Thanksgiving weekend, and the Arabs knew this, and they laid on lots of lamb and nice lamb's head in the middle of the table, as you do. But it was very nice indeed. And this is another trip that just came out of knowing people. There's serious expeditions and there's less serious expeditions. I love West Africa. Not only is the weather nice, not only are the people nice, but the propagation is great because you're straight across the ocean to North America. You're not that far from Europe. And what happened here, in fact, was that Steve G3VMW had said to Alan G3XAQ, who's been a number of times to all over Africa and East Africa as well, can you help me to organise a trip? It's a long time since I've done one, I'm a bit rusty. Steve had been with us to the Comoros, but that was his last expedition a number of years before. And so they gathered up Ian, M0PCB, and Mark, M0DXR, to go to the Gambia. And then at the last minute, for personal reasons, Mark had to drop out. Oh, we need a fourth operator. Oh, that Don, he'll probably come along. And so we knocked up 23,000 QSOs in 10 days, holiday style as I call it. In other words, we all broke for dinner together, as against a serious expedition where you keep stations on the air and take and eat in shifts. And in fact, that then led me to get my own C5 license. I was back in March for Beru, and this was through a lady in the travel industry, a Yorkshire lass who's lived and worked out there for years, and has now got an apartment that she rents out. Alan and I have kept in touch with her ever since that trip. So one thing leads to another. And in fact, Alan and I are going back there next month for CQ Worldwide CW. We're going to do 2 single band efforts for that. So yes, you know, one thing leads to another. Incidentally, you know, we put up these spider beams in the hotel grounds on that occasion. It was a hotel where all the elderly Brits and Dutch and so on go in the winter for a cheap winter holiday and not paying for heating and so on. And they're very mean. They don't go out to restaurants. You know, they're trying to live on their pension. And we thought, how are they going to react? And in fact, we were the best entertainment they'd had, you know, all season. And, who have you been talking to today, dear? So that was quite amusing. And, you know, here's a different example. I was going out to, my son and I just did a trip to, it's to LZ, that's right. You know, we got into the habit of doing air miles trips, very cheap trips. We went to Sofia on EasyJet with some points and stayed in a hotel, a Hilton, with some of the points he's earned. So dead cheap for me. Visited one of the amateurs out there, a member of FOC, and did some operating. But I put a post on one of the reflectors saying, is there a seat for CQ Worldwide Phone? This was October of 2015, somewhere in zone 20. No, nothing came back, but I had an email from the guys at SZ1A, and this was on the CQ contest reflector, the international one. It's run from the States. Had a reply from the guys at SZ1A saying, actually, we're very keen to have visiting operators. We've got this nice station. It's in an old schoolhouse in a village some way out in the sticks. The school is defunct. No pupils anymore, but they never know. There may be children come along, the village may grow. So they did a deal with the Red Forest contest team, as they call themselves. If you keep the place in good order, you can use it for your ham radio activities. That sounds like a very good deal. So they said to me, come along. They took care of everything. They met me at Athens Airport. One of their members looks after some of the avionics at Athens Airport. He picked me up and we drove to the contest station, had a great time. And as you can see, they did some nice food and lots of ouzo and olives and a little bit of operating. So that was fun. And in fact, I mean, you know, that they are still very welcoming to outside operators. If you want to do a contest from SZ1A, you will be made most welcome. They're completely mad. They're Greek, but... And here was a slightly different example. This one came the other way round. There was a request on February or thereabouts of 2016, again on the CQ contest reflector. We need operators for CQ WPX phone, end of March. And I responded to that and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you. And I was just a bit surprised because LY have got some very good operators. You know, why do they need extra? Well, it turned out that it was the Easter weekend, and Easter is like Christmas here. It's a big family get-together in Lithuania. And in fact, I think I was the only Brit on the plane. The rest of them were Lithuanians working and living in the UK, but flying back to visit their relatives. So they were a bit short of ops. And I flew to COWw, so I was met at the airport. I was taken to a local contest station there and then driven to the LY26A station, which is actually Rolly LY4A's station, and we did the contest. So you can see we had a number of visitors. YL1ZF, who has become quite well known over the last few years from D4 and from 3C and from various other places. I think he was behind the C21 recently. UR9QQ and so on, and indeed some of the LYs. And Rowley has bought this farm, and that's the 40-metre beam, full-size 5-element. You know, these are the things you enjoy and remember. You know, we think JA on 40 metres on SSB is quite difficult. They boom in at S9, you're one hop nearer, and you've got a 5-element Yagi. Oh, it takes a big tower to support it, but all their towers are ex-Russian military, and they're huge. Absolutely huge. Their radios are 775s. They can't afford, you know, the fancy radios, but they've got this other hardware. That's the linear, or one of them. To change bands, you change the PA coil. The only person prepared to change the PA coil was Rowley, because he built it. Nobody else would go anywhere near it. There were quite a lot of thousands of volts on the PA, and those are the ducts to take the hot air out to the outside. It's amazing how much heat 400 watts generates. You don't need me to explain how I ended up doing this one. One of my big regrets is never visiting Steve and Ava when they were living in Kota Kinabalu. But I made up for it the other year by going to Bonaire and visiting them. Steve, of course, used to live just a few miles from me when I first moved to Reading. So I've known him for a very long time. Scott, W4PA, who's runs a retailer, an amateur radio retailer in the States, has been going out there for a while, and then a couple of the local, I say local, Dutch ops who live out there. Proven station. Steve, currently they still rent half of this duplex, and the other half is rented out. A lot of the time it's rented to divers. Bonaire is absolutely wonderful for scuba diving and even just snorkeling. But Steve has permanent antennas up there. That's one of them. There's a lot of scrub around, and he's just put antennas up. Nobody seems to mind. And so it's rented out quite frequently to amateurs as well. Jamie, M0SDV has been out there, a number of others. And of course, that was great fun. Steve took me on the usual tour of the island. And, you know, what's not to like? And on the way, I had a layover in PJ2. Well, there was a group of Germans going to be at the PJ2 contest station, PJ2T, for the contest. I dropped them a line, said I've got 8 hours stuck in PJ2. Any chance? And they said, we'll send somebody to meet you at the airport and drive you out there. And I made 50-odd QSOs, ticked it off for my DXFC active. And met them, and you know, this is amateur radio. And again, one thing leads to another. On that HS0 trip, over, guess what, a beer, Barb and Andy and I were saying, well, yeah, ZC4 hasn't been activated for a while. What about doing the contest at the end of January, the top band contest? Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Anyway, Bob got back, and he was in the UK with family before Christmas, and he got in touch and said, was it just the beer talking, or are we going to do this? And we decided we would do it, and roped it made it more than just a contest operation. So I roped in Mike, G3WPH, sitting there, I've roped in on various things over the years, have I not? And Neil, who's a friend of G3VMW, who had been invited but couldn't come. And Stavros, who we've known from his days at Cambridge University, and is now, guess what, in charge of licensing in Cyprus, so a nice man to have on your side. And we had fun. The only thing that wasn't fun was that it was blooming cold in Cyprus at the end of January. But great demand, and not difficult to get to, not difficult to activate. And there's a group just announced that they're about, haven't you, Rob? Yes, that you're going to go back in January. Do you not learn anything from the same location? Now, this is another interesting one, you see, and I did this presentation at the GMDX convention the other year, but John G4IRN ended up doing a single operator effort from the Andaman Islands. It wasn't intended to be, as any of you who saw his presentation last year, but it turned out to be for various reasons. But he was helped in getting his VU license, which is not the straightforward thing, because you know that the British taught administration to the Indians and they have taken it to a fine art. But Prasad and Deepak helped John get a license. Well, what it turned out is that they were also involved for several years in running a COWw from the Royal Omani Amateur Radio Society station. The Omanis like to keep their station on the air. It keeps the profile up. The Sultan is the sponsor. He is licensed. He is a 44A. And he is paid for the station, basically. It's on the outskirts of Muscat, between just on the way out to the airport. There's an Indian guy who works there, well, he's involved permanently with the club. He works in the oil industry and has been in Oman for years. And so he wrote to Prasad and Deepak to organise COWw ops, because although they've got plenty of SSB ops in Oman, they've not got so many competent COWw ops. And they invited, long story, but they invited John to join them, and John couldn't go, and they said, do you know anybody else? And he got in touch with me because we'd done voodoo trips together, including the Q8 one I mentioned. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And although Prasad had never met me, he knew me as an FOC member and various other things, and said, yeah, that sounds good. And we ended up there with Chad, WE9V, who came in from China where he'd been working, and Mike K9NW, who I'd met many times in the States. But RAWS welcomes guest ops, as I say, especially for COWw contests. Hospitality was great. They even paid my hotel room for 4 nights, meals, the whole thing. And it all came out of, you know, this connections again. Now, just sort of kind of to wrap up, I'll just cover 1 or 2 other things very quickly. WRTC. Every 4 years, they're always looking for referees. They typically have about 50 teams, and they need 50 referees. Poor souls who are going to sit there and listen to other people having fun for 24 hours. And foolishly, I volunteered for Brazil in 2006 and was invited to join. You've got to be able to listen to COWw for 24 hours and without falling asleep. And then it turned out 4 years later that Roger G3SXW was supposed to be in Moscow as a judge, but cried off and suggested that I take the role instead. And therefore, I ended up alongside Dave K1ZZ, who's back there, and again in New England as a judge. Great fun. Here we are with Harry, RA3AUU in Moscow, discussing what's involved. And here's one of the stations in New England. They were all identical, as you'll have gathered. The tents were the same, the antennas were the same, and great fun. I remember sitting in the back of Dave's car, driving from one station to the other and operating QRP with Dave's mobile antenna on the car and working 9A1A and some of those big European stations. And you know, one of the things, though, you know, much lower key is this idea. Stuart GM4AFF runs a DXFC website. How many countries have you visited and how many have you operated from? An amateur radio can add to pretty much any trip. Radio amateurs are hospitable. And, you know, one of the trips I did, for example, a weekend, a Ryanair type trip to Romania, and visited YO3JR, who again I knew through WRTC. His mother, YO3FRI, is a member of FOC. Dropped them a line. Oh yes, come and visit my station, do some operating. And he's got a lot of towers on it. It's an industrial site on the outskirts of Bucharest. A very well equipped station, and happy to let me just sit there and play radio, because that's what we do. And if you want to do it yourself and not be a guest elsewhere, there's lots of information on the web. And you find things about licensing, World Licensing and Operating Directory by Steve Telenius Lowe. Guess what? That's probably a little bit dated now, but there's lots of websites. Here's one, VP5, ham radio vacation, rent a place, or lots of experienced people you can ask. There are Facebook groups. The world is your oyster. Oh, incidentally, I meant to say at A44, the other thing they did, I was sleeping on the Sunday afternoon, they rushed in and said, wake up! The brigadier's coming in, he's head of the Sultan's cavalry, also a licensed amateur, and they did this lovely keepsake for each of us to take home. So, you know, wonderful, wonderful. Right, just quickly, guest operating doesn't have to be expensive, but groups work differently. Some require payment up front. See, the FSDXA, we had big investments, sending containers and things, needed people to pay early on. Some of them, like the Voodoo things, it's a group of friends, you all go out there with dollars in your pocket, and some poor bugger ends up trying to keep track of the finances. I did it one year. We had dollars because of the Americans, pounds because of us, and whatever the local currency was, which came in piles about that high because the notes weren't worth very much, and trying to keep track. But we got there somehow. But it really depends on you and your budget. I mentioned the $10,000 opportunity to go to South Orkney, but some people would have jumped at that. And I just want to kind of finish off by talking about etiquette. Respect the requirements and traditions of the host country. Didn't drink in Kuwait, didn't drink in Oman. I did drink as soon as we got on the plane and took off, but dress behaviour, all of those. Don't expect a freebie, but you will find that local amateurs are hospitable, but be ready to give them a little gift or something in return. There's no overriding rule, but just be sensitive. Don't put your foot in it, and I have seen it happen, and it has certainly happened. Chris.
Right, thanks, Don. We'll start with that. We've got a couple of minutes. Any questions? Yep.
Oh, the only microphone.
Hi, Glyn, GW0INA.
Yeah.
Don, is the book the CDXC wrote with the late Neville, a handbook of DXing? Because with that little book, it got me bitten, and I literally...
Oh, right.
I told Neville to his face when he was still alive, but I've done 5 long-distance expeditions, and that little handbook is the idiot's guide to organising a DX. And I'm an idiot, but that guide was fantastic.
Thank you for that. DXpeditioning behind the scenes, which we wrote. There are copies still available, and a lot of them were printed. Neville had high hopes for it. It was really a book about... It is really a project management book, but written from an amateur radio perspective. And thank you, for the accolade. But I wrote a chapter on how to publicise your expedition. Other people wrote chapters on other things, and I'm glad it helped.
It's a step-by-step guide, and truly, if you follow that book, I mean, the first expedition I organised was to Ascension Island in St Helena. Immediately after that, I went down to American Samoa, Ofu and Tutuila, and it was all following that book. And following the book, when I went down to, give you some idea, put your neck out a little bit, when I went down to Ascension Island, I got the RAF to pay you to ship all our kit free of charge.
Any other questions? Everyone wants lunch. Thanks very much, Don.
My pleasure.
Okay, it's a break for lunch now, and back in here at 1:30, which is actually me after lunch.